ambassador bridge between the United States and Canada. You couldn't see it. It took years of complaints and lawsuits from local communities to get shipping ports in California to require piles of the petcoke being stored there to be kept in enclosed facilities and covered at all times. Other communities continue to fight, including my city of Chicago, I'm proud to represent. And as the U.S. refines more and more tar sands, and that's what this bill is all about, refining more and more Canadian tar sands, producing tons every single day of this petcoke with no end in sight and no way of protecting the people who live around that area from the damage it's going to cause to the lungs of children and other vulnerable people, elderly people with respiratory challenges. Residents in Houston, Texas, and the state of Ohio have complained about how these petcoke piles stored in their neighborhoods are damaging their homes and health. But many of the Americans affected by petcoke don't have the money or power to take on big companies. So it's up to Congress. It's up to us to ensure that every person in America, rich or poor, whether they live in a good neighborhood or a struggling neighborhood, has the protection against public health hazards. So here's what my amendment does. There's a current exemption of petcoke from environmental laws. When you think of all the things blowing in the air, how in the world did petcoke end up being treated like fairy dust? It's exempt from laws relating to basic things like Superfund. It's exempt from laws relating to hazardous waste and materials. Boy, there must have had friends in high places to make sure that this miserable source of respiratory problems would be exempt from federal law. My amendment would change that. It would end this exemption so that they would be held to environmental and public health standards when it comes to this miserable byproduct of Canadian tar sands and the Keystone XL Pipeline. The amendment goes on to require the EPA and Department of Transportation to implement rules for petcoke storage and transportation to protect the public health and environment. Is there anyone here that will tell you that the folks, TransCanada, or those who are refining this, should not have that responsibility? I wouldn't want to see this anywhere. I wouldn't want to see it in Alaska. I wouldn't want to see it in Oklahoma. I sure don't want to even see it in the city of Chicago. But to think it goes unregulated, absolutely unregulated, it's amazing. That's what my amendment addressed. The U.S. already produces millions of tons of petcoke each year. Building this pipeline is just going to add dramatically to that amount. And by fixing the legal status of petcoke and making it subject to the same laws as all other dangerous materials, we can help ensure that clean air and clean water is something everyone enjoys, whether they're rich or poor, whatever state they happen to live in. I hope the Senate will have a chance to vote on my amendment to close this loophole for petcoke and establish reasonable guidelines for handling the material. It's time we put the health and well-being of Americans ahead of profits of any industry involved in the processing of Canadian tar sands, because no community, especially not the southeast side of Chicago, should be considered a dumping ground for companies to make money off the lungs and health of vulnerable children, elderly, and poor people. No family should be forced to live next door to a 3-story high pile of petcoke, and that's what was going on. No kid should have to move from a ball field to play inside so they aren't exposed to hazardous chemicals. I know what's going to happen here. Somebody's going to make a motion to table this amendment. But you can run, but you can't hide. Just like you can run, but you can't hide from blowing petcoke. If you won't allow a vote on this amendment to classify this as a material that should be regulated for the safety of the environment and public health, you'll be on record if you vote to table this amendment. I urge my colleagues, even if you just dearly love the Keystone XL Pipeline, even if you can't wait to bring in Canadian tar sands, think about it as your hometown, your neighborhood. If you lived in a house like this and looked across the road at that miserable pile, 3 stories high, of petcoke blowing in for your children and your grandchildren to breathe every day. I yield the floor.